Hey guys, I'm going to be making a video here on the French defense advance variation. Now what this is essentially a trap on the advanced variation for the French defense as white. For context, I'm a little over 2,000 plus on chess.com. I play on and off, and I've seen this trap several times. I would say it occurs probably 50% of the time I play against the French defense advance variation. So I'm just going to be giving you guys a tip on how to play against it, and one of the main trap lines in the French defense advance variation. Now what I'm showing here is essentially the main structure for the French defense advance variation. And there are a couple of themes here that's important. So what we have here is the E5 pawn that's central to this position, and there's just a lot of tension around this E5 pawn. So black has both of his knights and the queen eyeing the pawn, and as white, you yourself, you have your queen, your rook, and your knight protecting and defending the E5 pawn. Now white has sacrificed a pawn in this position, and I'll be showing you, just for context, I'll be showing you guys how to get to this position. It's very common in the French defense advance variation, where white sacrifice the pawn for some initiative, black up a pawn, they have some decent compensation. The position is, relatively speaking, equal. No one here has an advantage. Now both of black and white have castled, white obviously having both their bishops and their knights pointing towards the black king. Now the trap essentially occurs after white having placed both of his knights on f3 and g3, white playing the move knight to h5. And what this move does is it's essentially targeting the g7 square. So right now, the only piece that's defending the g7 square is the black king. So the theme of this trap is essentially to checkmate black on g7 with your queen. Now how this is done, it's done by displacing this g7 pawn that's very weakly defended right now. And partly why it's weakly defended is because of this blockade with e5, right? A lot of black's pieces are left of d7, d7, and left of d7, where, right, we only have two pieces here, the knight and the rook, that are right of it. So after this move, knight to h5, black would usually play somewhat of a passive move. For example, a4, and then black continues with the trap, which is essentially a piece sacrifice, sacrificing the bishop by playing the move bishop to h6. Now black has a couple options. They could take or not take. Well, two options really. 99% of the time though, you would see black taking this bishop. If not, they'll be running into issues where you take the pawn and then the rook is under pressure. The bishop could always drop back to f6, and black's gonna have a bad time. So 99% of the time, practically speaking, black takes this bishop. And this is essentially how the trap is. It's already been laid, and now you're coming in for checkmate. So white plays the move, and the very critical move, queen to d2. Now what this move does is it aligns the queen with the h6 pawn. That's impossible to defend as black. So black, oftentimes you would see two common moves, which is rook to e8 or knight takes e5 because you've moved your queen, so now the e5 pawn is technically you could take it. So as for the sake of an example, I'll just play the move knight takes e5, but then queen takes h6, and this is it's checkmate essentially. It's a force mate, and there's no way that the black could defend this. They could try the move knight takes f3, after pawn takes. There's nothing more to do here. The checkmate is on g7, and it's not stoppable, right? Even if you play the move, for example, queen to e5, trying to protect it, then just rook takes, right? So queen trying to defend it, but then rook takes, and it's going to be game over. Next move. So that's essentially the position of how the trap happens and the general idea behind the trap. Now I'll show you how to get to the French defense position where you can execute the trap in a practical game. So if I just go back, so it starts off with e4. If you typically play e4, you've probably seen the structure quite often. Black plays e6, then d4, d5, and then the advance variation with e5. Black puts pressure on d4, white plays the move knight to f3, black also putting pressure, and then I recommend, there's a couple of ways to go from here. I recommend the move a3. You could also play the move bishop to d3, but in terms of move order, you want to, generally speaking, you want to play the move a3, and the reason why is because you don't want any unwanted checks along this diagonal, and I'll show you an example where there could be an unwanted check and then you would run into issues. So you're going to want to play the move a3. And by the way, in a classical game, the most common and the best move is c3, just providing support to the d4 square, but in order to lay the trap, you're going to want to play the move a3. Now black at some point is going to take this d4 pawn, so you play that, and then you just bring your bishop to d3. Then you get the move queen to c7, just putting pressure on the e5 square. Then you move your queen to e2. So whenever there's pressure on the e5 square, you always want to be defending it with your queen, and then you're going to want to bring in your rook. Then you get the move bishop to c5, castle. Now black, they usually play a move such as a5, and the reason why is just to free up some space on the queen side, because they don't want to be harassed by the move bishop to pawn to b4, right? Because by playing b5, then I can no longer play the move bishop pawn to b4, because pawn takes and then knight could take. So they free up space by playing the move a5. Then you just bring your rook into the game with rook to e1. Black continues with their normal development, and then you start to swing over the knight. So the knight hops over from from b1 to d2 to f1, and then to g3. So you're going to want to slowly make that maneuver. Black, they would place their knight on the g6 square, but then you just continue on with your normal development. Black castles, and then you play knight to g3, and this is essentially the main position that you're going to get. Now, just a comment, typically with more advanced players, you would never get the chance to maneuver your knight around to g3. Typically what happens is you get the move f6, and then there's pressure that's added on the e5 square, and then eventually you're forced to either take and then play on, or they take and then there's certainly more pressure on the center, so then you don't really get time to maneuver the knight around to play the trap. But more often than not, you won't see this this f6 move, and then you would be able to play the trap. So from here, black is usually unsure of what to do. So typically you would see moves such as bishop to d7, just freeing up the back rank, freeing up space on just finalizing your development by moving your bishop. And then you get the move knight to h5. Now from here, the trap is pretty much already set, and the position is quite dangerous as black, and you're going to want to be very careful if you're black here. White, on the other hand, although you're looking at the rating bar and you're seeing that, well, black is pretty much up here. That's true, but practically speaking, white is more favorable here. For example, you may see this sometimes on and off. You see this naive move by playing the queen to b6 just to put pressure on the f2 square if the d4 pawn were to ever move. But this is actually a big blunder, and the game is going to be pretty much lost after a move like queen to b6. So for example, if I play this move, you could see the rank, the engine saying it's giving it a +4 position for white, who's currently down a pawn. And the reason why is because the queen is no longer defending the 7th rank, which is quite critical right now, even though it doesn't look like it. The simple continuation is, again, the simple trap, which is bishop to h6. And this move, it's very devastating for the black position, because the pawn, you're forced to pretty much take this pawn, and then there's no way to defend it. So black is forced to take, and then you play the move queen to d2. Now from here, you would sometimes get the move f5, but then just en passant takes, and then you would oftentimes get the move rook to f7, but then just queen takes, and then the threat is going to be checkmate on g7. So black usually brings in their bishop, forcing the queen back, but then just simply queen to g5, and then there's no way to stop checkmate. Well, not checkmate, but it's a pretty much lost position from here. So you could play the move queen to d8, but then just bishop takes, pawn takes, and then the rook is pretty much forced to defend. But then from here, I mean, it's over. You could just play pawn check. The rook cannot take because it's pinned to the queen. So then you get king to h8. But then after just knight takes, bishop takes, and then queen to h5. After bishop to h6, it's going to be checkmate. So I'm just going to show you a couple of games, 2 games, just from a practical standpoint as to how this trap works. So again, this is against a almost 2,000 rated player. I'm a little over 2,000. So again, the French defense advanced variation with e5, pushing, and in this position they decide to take a bit early. So they take my pawn on d4, but then I just continue by playing the move a3. If I hadn't played a3 and I played, for example, bishop to d3, then you would run into an issue where they are able to get this check in, and then you'll be forced to either move your knight or your bishop, and then you'd end up losing one of those pieces if they were to exchange off. And ultimately, to lay the trap, you're going to want to keep all of your minor pieces on the board, so you're going to want to play h3, as in what I did in the game. Then I can move the bishop to d3. So maneuvering the rook and continuing on with normal development. So protecting the e5 pawn at all costs. More advanced players would have already played the move f6, so I would have already been under pressure with respect to the e5 pawn, but not in this scenario, and more often than not, you don't get that move f6. And then after knight to h5, the trap is pretty much already in place. And then bishop to h6. Black tries to move their king, but then it's game over. And then just one more game. So they decide to keep the tension a bit more. This person is almost rated 2100. Sorry, that's my computer fan if you could hear it. Again, they move their bishop. There's tension along. The queen is positioned on b6, which is, you either see the queen on b6 or c7. They try to attack the e5 pawn, but then you just move your queen and you continue with moving your knight over. And then you play bishop to h6, takes, queen to d2. Now in here the bishop is on e7, and sometimes you would get a position like this where they are actually able to play the move bishop to g5, but then it's just simply you take it, and again, the position, it's practically speaking equal, but very, very difficult for black to play it practically speaking. So takes, right, threatening checkmate, but then just takes with the take the pawn with the knight. They're forced to capture with the rook, and then again, the g7 squared's very, very weak, so you could pin with you could play the move and bishop to e6, and this is pinning the queen, and the queen is defending the critical g7 square, but the queen is forced to take, so it's checkmate. And yep, that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoyed the video.